Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode is very important. I think it's regarding racism and racial injustice is happening around the world. But as a human rights worker and activist, I think we can contribute and we can discuss how we can solve many issues. We have our Professor Donald. Always he support World Talent Economy Forums. We have Dr. Sharita Sharma. After a long time, she again joined with us. We have Mr. Jem Eid. Jem is actually super powerful analytics with his different strategic point of views. And we have our very good friends and supporters and good organizer, Mr. Brent Elmans. More of our speakers may join soon. So I want to start from Professor Donald. How do you want to define this racial issue? How we can solve it? What's the present condition? What the research information you want to share with our audience?
Okay, it's a complex issue because a lot of people, I think that there's a core philosophical thing that in the United States especially that needs to be looked at. And what that is the assumption, it actually comes from Calvinist beliefs that every person is the architect of their own life. In other words, whatever happens to us is the consequence of good or bad decisions that we've made in our life. And that leads to the idea that if somebody's poor or somebody's disadvantaged or somebody winds up in jail or whatever like that, the reason that it is because they've made bad decisions in their lives. But if you look at the research about it, this just is not the case. There's a wonderful book called The Long Shadow, and right now I'm forgetting the author's name. I can look it up, but they looked at 800 kids in Baltimore, and they started from when they were born, 2 or 3 years old, basically, from very young childhood all the way into well into adulthood. And they followed them, and every year they would get together. They'd give them IQ tests. They'd, assess. They researched to find out how they did in school, how they did, how they did in their family life. Whether they went to jail or not, what kind of job they got, all the kinds of things about their life. They followed them for 40 years or more, and they were half black and half white, and they were from similar socioeconomic circumstances. And what happened was that ultimately the black kids did worse than the white kids. And so you have to they ask themselves, this is a sociology book, they have to ask themselves the question, why? And what happens is that there's subtle disadvantages. So a person can be as hardworking and well-intentioned as you want, but if your parents are working, both parents are working 2 jobs to support you, when you come home at night, you're not going to have anybody to help you with your homework or encourage you. If you're poor, the health system in the United States isn't very good, so there's a potential that you're going to get sick. Your parents are going to get sick, and you're not going to be able to basically do anything about it. All of these things, when you graduate from high school and you want to get a job, if the white kids would have an uncle or something like that would hire them for their first job, but the black kids didn't. And so all of these disadvantages just add up and add up and add up, so that people, no matter how well-intentioned they are, they just don't have the social networks to be able to be able to succeed. And this is systemic. It comes back to the racial disparities that were in the United States because of slavery. And I can address, I know some about the caste system and things like that, so I can talk about other countries as well. But this is a model of what winds up happening. And so then the in the United States, there is like a caste system that still exists. And the southern part of the United States deliberately had slavery, and I mean they tried to secede from the United States so they could maintain slavery. And then when they lost the war, they kind of re-implemented it in a way we call Jim Crow laws, which were laws, and they're still fighting to this day to make that happen. They're trying to disenfranchise blacks so they're not allowed to vote. And it's huge. There's hundreds of bills right now to try and do that, because they're so mad because when people of color vote, then they don't elect Republicans. So the Republicans are doing everything they can to suppress votes. All these things add up to create systemic racism. I'm going to mention one other thing, and then I really want to hear what everybody else has to say. On a personal level, we can feel that we're not racist or not prejudiced against other people, but our unconscious mind has what we call implicit racism. And a lot of times we just respond to people of different races, different religions, different cultures. We've grown up to have a negative opinion of them. And even though we know that's wrong, oftentimes we respond unconsciously in ways that cause us to make judgments. And there's a website called Project Implicit at Harvard, where you can go and you can actually test yourself and see if you have implicit bias against race, gender, all these various kinds of things. And I'll put the link in later. But now I want to hear from everybody else.
Thank you, Professor Donald. We have our ESG and impact investment expert, president Swiss Impact Investments, Mr. Ben Banerjee. So definitely we will learn, because he's an columnist and researchers and policymakers. We will learn that how we can remove racism and racial injustice. But before that, I just want to know from Dr. Sharita Sharma that how you want to analyze this point.
I totally agree with Professor Donald when he says that, we have implicit racism in us. We may not be personally, we may not be endorsing racism, but somewhere we have been conditioned into believing. As an Indian, what I would like to say is that we are obsessed with the color white. We want it on the skin. Yes, we want it on the skin, and we want to be, appreciated by the white men, by the white people. We want to be in their company. We somehow are obsessed with being white, and especially if you are a female, then you have to be white, or else the day you are born, your parents and your family, they try to do everything possible in order to make you fair. Because being dark skinned may not fetch you a good husband in the marriage market. So that is one thing. We have been conditioned into believing that white is beautiful, white is good, white is perfect. Whatever the kind of person that person may be, if she is white, she is the ultimate bride. Okay, and the second kind of issue that we need to address in India is the racism that people of Northeast India feel in mainstream India. When I talk about mainstream India, I talk about the capital city, that is New Delhi. So people from the Northeast, whenever they come to mainstream India, that is the capital of India, then they become victims of racism because of the kind of features that people of Northeast India have. Luckily, I'm born with the kind of feature where you cannot label me from that particular part of the country. But if I would have to start talking in the local language, then yes, I would be caught. And the moment I'm caught, I'll become a victim of racism. So that is how it is in India. I think these are two areas which need to be discussed. But sadly, we never come around to discuss these issues, and these are always brushed under the carpet. So just this morning, I was watching this matrimonial ad where a very educated young man wants to have a fair and beautiful bride, and I was like, okay, disgusted. I just put it back to where it should be. So that is what I would like to say for the moment about racism in India.
Thank you, thank you. We have our honorable analyst, Mr. Ben Banerjee. So, sir, how do you want to analyze this point, this racism and racial injustice? I want to learn from you about your experience from like Europe and other countries. Yes.
Thank you, Sharif, for inviting. And I'm so sorry I missed the opinion of Donald. I would have loved to hear it from the beginning. And being originally from India, I completely endorse and agree to what Sarita said. So I think, in my point of view, you see it in 2 points. One is the intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic as an example of the first, for example, the skin color, and it goes, by the way, both ways. So I'm not saying that white against black is happening, but it's happening both ways. And the extrinsic is many factors play here a role. Especially for countries like India, you have to think about the history of the colonialism and also the lack of knowledge of the own heritage and history. And in today's information age, the media is playing a very big part also, and a very big role in keeping this extrinsic racism on. And sometimes, which is also happening in Europe, is that races are being associated with religions, which is creating another issue. So the two groups, also you cannot clearly identify these two as extrinsic and intrinsic, because the definition gets very vague. If you look at Europe, countries which have colonial past, like United Kingdom, France, you will find that the social acceptance of different races in leadership position, for example, because I'm in the financial sector, in industrial sector, is very easily accepted. People accept it normally. It's whether you go to UK but on the other hand, if you go to countries like Germany, which doesn't have a very colonial, it has a relatively very small colonial past, it's very hard. There is still an intrinsic. I'm not saying Germans are racist. I'm just saying that it's still the social acceptance of non-white in a leadership position is harder in countries with no colonial past than countries with colonial past. And this is not about having immigrants, because Germany has immigrants, England has immigrants, all that. And me being an Indian who grew up in Netherlands, so I never ever experienced open discrimination in Netherlands. Netherlands is also a country with a huge colonial past, so there people are accepted, doesn't matter where you come from. But it is intrinsically, it is still there. For example, I was in the parliament and we were having this is quite a long time back. We were having a discussion on education being made possible for migrants in their own language. And we were talking about two groups of migrants in Netherlands. There's the Turkish and the Moroccans. They're the biggest two groups. Education in their own language. So when it was my turn to speak, I was against it. I said, sorry, I think this will, in my opinion, this will work against integration of this migrant society, of these migrants in the Dutch society. And it was very amusing to see that even in the face of the most open-minded politicians, they were completely surprised, because they did not expect this answer from me. They thought I would be a very strong advocate. So it has something to do with skin color, but this is very intrinsic, and I don't take it negatively. I think in India, it would be exactly the same. And the second point which you mentioned is the racial injustice. I think that is much more complicated, especially with the definition, because now in Europe, we are having a lot of questions on profiling terrorists using statistics. Does it fall under racial discrimination? For example, you must have read, it was like 2 years back, it was 3-4 years back, there was a huge attack on the women in Cologne during the New Year's Eve by people of North African background. So, and it happened for 4 hours long. Nobody came to the help of the women. 1 year later, the police, what they did, because it was going to reoccur. Again, there was a huge group of North Africans who were heading towards main German cities, maybe or maybe not with the same purpose, but the police stopped them. They stopped them outside the city. Then the police was taken as a kind of acting on a racial injustice. And then it's a question, I'm not an expert on this topic, so I cannot give my opinion on this, but I would say that we have to keep open mind from both sides. So, and what to me is far more serious, because I'm in the world of impact investment, is the Aboriginals and the indigenous. They are far more serious matter, because they are the ones today who, in my opinion, are still living or trying to live in a balance with the nature. And they are the most threatened, the most discriminated, and the most kind of not massacred, but they are being completely hit in every possible way. And no help, no media coverage, nothing is reaching them. Whether we talk about the indigenous tribes in Amazon to the aboriginals in Australia, I think that is where we have to look into the racial injustice, because this is a very major factor which is absolutely absent from all discussions and everything. And my last, sorry for holding a monologue. My
No problem.
last point will be is the new era. We are coming into the world of AI. We are the artificial intelligence. And that really worries me, because if you look at how the Chinese are using AI on the Uyghurs to profile them, to find them out, to take them out. And this, I think, and worst of all, most of this technology is being supplied from here, from Europe. And this, I think, is also a matter where people should really think about how much further are we going, especially when we are entering the world of artificial intelligence and things like that. So here I stop my monologue.
No, thank you. Because I know that you have a very good understanding about this point, and I just want to add another point: World Talent Economy Forum and Swiss Impact Investments and the Impact Investment Schools. We are tie up together, and we go for new training and development courses in Asia Pacific. Those who are observing our show from Asia Pacific. We want to train startup. We want to train different kind of small medium enterprise. Those who love to learn impact investment. And already I getting too much of call from Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, from different think tank, policymakers, from governments and corporations, and those who want to love to learn impact investment from. I think from next week we can start our session, and hopefully it will be very, very effective, because some of the leaders of this area, especially like Mr. Benz and Savitlana, they will train our youth community about the impact investment, which is very, very important for us. I request all of the youth community, those who are observing our show, you can directly communicate with us, and hopefully we can arrange the times and everything will be online. So thank you, Mr. Ben, for supporting World Talent Economy Forum initiative. We have our another panelist, Maskawat Hassan. He's a columnist and educationist from South Asia. So we will learn more things about racism and the racial issues, because he has strong engagement with different universities and think tanks in South Asia. So, Mr. Brentelman, I know that you are also work with Artplex and these things, and we are also helping each other about these Artplex issues. But my fact is that as you are working with TEF, Transdisciplinary Agora, for future discussions, and you have a strong engagement with Africa. So how do you want to analyze this point?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a pretty strong relationship with a number of folks in the African continent and such, but I mean, my insight on this topic is definitely primarily related to the United States. Here in the U.S., as has been touched on, these inherent biases and racisms, they just kind of exist. And it's not just in the United States, as others have discussed, it's, just kind of part of human nature to just build these types of biases and things like that. But as Professor Donald was talking about, the United States is a society that's kind of built off of this Calvinist, perspective as in a secularized form. And a big part of that Calvinist perspective was the idea of predestination. And as Donald was talking about, this idea that society values those who are in better positions than others. And even further, on that topic as well, was the idea that, in this perspective, the idea of what you actually are doing doesn't really even matter as much as what you have to show for it. Because like I remember when I learned about this topic in school, the example that the professor that I was taught this about explained the idea that if you were a contractor and you were getting paid to do 2 hours work, but for 90 minutes you were in the bar shooting pool and they didn't catch you and they still pay you for 2 hours work, then God must favor you in this Calvinistic perspective that became secularized and formed into capitalism. And so, this is, I think, very something to definitely consider when you're thinking about this, when you're thinking about the disparity that exists and these inherent biases, as Professor Donald was really doing a great job of touching on. Yeah, and so I think that for me, the biggest issue that I've seen lately is the idea that racism has become a hot topic over the last handful of years here in the United States, which kind of poses its own problems because there's a lot of people who would rather deny any trace of racism in their psyche or in their personality, when in reality it's just kind of something, biases are something that we all deal with. And so then when you have these people that refuse to acknowledge it, then they get really combative and they cling to these types of perspectives and these ideas that they hold, and it can create a lot of problems. And so that's a big perspective that I see, and I think that it's really important for people to look inward and try to acknowledge the biases that we all have and see how we can break these down. And just one other thing, another place that seems to be really tough, is Kashmir. We have that friend Sharif that we were chatting with for a while from Kashmir. And it's they've been in military occupation since basically the end of World War II, and they're completely it's completely a situation rooted in racism. And as Ben was talking about, this is racism related to religion, especially, as being right there on the border, dealing with China and India and Pakistan, and it's a really tough situation. And these racial factors really make it all that much more difficult. And I think that there's so many places, as you mentioned, we work with TAFs quite extensively in the African continent, and there's a tremendous amount of racism just in every single country there, it seems. I haven't actually spent any time there directly on the ground, but I mean, the things that our friends over there tell us, it leaves a lot to consider. So I think that this is definitely a global issue. It's not a problem that certain groups have. It's a problem that exists in all of us, and to really overcome it, we need to overcome it as individuals internally on our own, rather than trying to tell everybody else how to think, because different cultures we do have these different ideas, and so there is this thin line, of acknowledging that what might come off as offensive and racist in one culture, there's that other culture over there is perfectly all right with having that conversation and speaking in those kinds of ways. But so then it comes down to comfort and the individual comfort, and realizing that there's just biases that we can overcome and treat people as individuals and extensions of the same kind of divine source that we all exist in. And so those are just some of my perspectives on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brent. Mr. Jem Eid, I know you have very good contributions through your foundation, even in Africa, especially chess and these kind of things. So how do you analyze these issues, special racism and racial injustice?
Well, I think that a less arrogant person would defer to the people who have spoken before him, but I'm going to go ahead anyways. I think that, when we go back to the Calvinists, it's definitely a good place to start, but I would go further and further back until when we were just primitive creatures, and the only community we knew were those around us. And if we saw somebody from a different community, we call them tribes, we would be afraid. So we associated this otherness with fear. And that existed for a long, long time. And it's part of our amygdala. It's part of our collective unconscious. And yes, the frontal lobes have developed, but they still get that stimulus from the amygdala. And we have to really work on our frontal lobes in order to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm getting that stimulus, but I can be aware of it and act and behave differently. And this is a complicated thing to do as an individual, and it's a very complicated thing to do as a culture. It's in a society, a country, to ask people to do that, because this stimulus is primitive and it is active in all of us. And, if I say, hey, I'm not racist, I could spend an hour with Professor Cornell West and he would convince me that I'm racist. So, nobody is free of this. We all have this in our collective unconscious, in the primitive parts of our brain. And I do believe that we can develop our frontal lobes to the extent, and all we can do is make progress. Because we say, in the United States, we say the father of our country was George Washington. The author of the Declaration of Independence was Thomas Jefferson. But these men owned slaves. Well, we have to think, well, you know, these men lived in the 18th century. We are in the 21st century. They only knew a little. So don't judge them too harshly. And remember that we live in the 21st century and we know a little bit more, but we still only know a little. And no matter how much we know, we only know a little. This is such a complicated issue. But I think that there are plenty of walls in the world, and the wall of racism, of making people the other and being afraid of them, that's just another wall, and tear down the walls. Thanks very much for your
Thank you. Thank you. Maskawat Ahsan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, how do you want to introduce this point, racism and racial injustice? And I know that you have a very good contribution in South Asia, especially country like Bangladesh. Previously, you have political engagement. Now you have a very good intellectual engagement, and you are trying to developing a very strong ecosystem with your journalist teams and many things. So, how do you want to introduce this point?
Thank you, Sharif. Actually, you see, racism is something that cannot be explained in black and white way. There's a gray area where we should all look into. I will tell you first one experience in Germany. Like once I was going on a train, and an old lady was shouting "Ausländer, Ausländer." Like she didn't like the presence of a foreigner there, and I didn't get angry with her, because what I could see that, this is her country. She had to see those days of Second World War, post Second World War, those days of miseries she had to survive. And towards the end of her life, she's traveling on a tram, and uh, and 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 she saw me that I'm a foreigner, and she could realize that I'm working there, and and so her grudge was quite justified. This is her land, and I was sharing her cake, or bread. And but you see, there is another side of it. I was sitting besides the river of Rhine, and one old lady, thinking that as I am coming from uh, a developing country, South Asia, so she offered me €5, thinking that I need that. I She was so graceful. So so I don't look at it into a very black and white way. But when we talk about South Asia, I have an observation that in South Asia, racism had been a tool of ruler elites, who wanted to be within their comfort zone, within the castle, and they wanted their children to have a privileged life and luxurious life. And people who used to live in poverty outside the castle, how to rule them? They used to divide them as Hindu, Muslims, uh, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and but when actually they try to the rulers or ruling elites, they try to hide their failure of governance. To hide that failure, they try to appease the wrath of the deprived people by dividing in them into A versus B, or C versus D. So when we talk about India and Pakistan, I have observed that this both of these countries in both of these countries, people are living under poverty, and most of the children, they don't have future, and only privileged children, they live within the castle of power elites. And these ruling elites, as they fail, they use this India and Pakistan factor as a scarecrow, or like we versus them. Either you are with India or you are with Pakistan. In Pakistan, they will say that either you are with Pakistan or you are a supporter of India. So this racism, it doesn't exist in the in the local areas, localities within the common man. Hindus, Muslims, people from different complexion, different race, they used to live together and they peacefully live together. But this ruling elite, to hide their failure of governance and to make more money and continue their exploitation, they use this quote unquote racism as a tool. This is a political tool to make money. Just this is a cash cow. Racism is a cash cow in South Asia.
Thank you,
That's
thank you, Maskawat Hassan. Thank you, Mr. Ben. So, like, I want to take your comments on this point, especially how Maskawat Hassan analyzed this point, especially that racism is a cash cow, and I want to add your point because, example, you are a very good example of successful professionals because from the India you conquered the global community with your impact investment initiative. You connected with all of the corporation. We want to know even what about the global corporate cultures and how we can overcome from these challenging situations, especially from South Asia. Yes.
I didn't conquer anything.
Okay. Okay.
So I'll just start. I don't agree to what Muscat said because I think racism is far more older and it has, like Donald and the others mentioned, that it's a far more older thing and it exists in every country. It is not where South Asia is the. I think what he means to say is more about nationalism or communalism. These are something else. That is not racism. Racism is purely based on race, if you go for the definition of it. So I would not think that, and I think giving the benefit to only to the elite group is giving them too much credit. I think it's not only the elite group, it's also the small villagers, everybody. We all have intrinsic and extrinsic or racism in us. So it is not limited to a specific group. And it's very funny that you say, because sometimes you see it is, if I look at Europe, in the, say about 20, 30 years back, if you look at the liberal Europe, or the so-called people who accepted foreigners more easily, were the poor ones. Today, it has exactly turned around. It is the rich ones who accept the foreigners more easily, and the poor ones in Europe have become more anti-foreigners. So we can't blame the elites, because in this case, in Europe, the elites are doing they want to integrate, they want to bring foreigners in. They are much more open-minded than the poor, the so-called poor people, or the uneducated, or the low. So it is not the task. It's not only to be blamed on the elites. I think all the groups, and of course, politicians have yet to gain. But again, I said it was confused with nationalism. I'm not talking about nationalism here. I'm talking about racism. Racism, I think, I don't see too much of that happening in South Asia. Of course, what Sarita mentioned, the implicit racism in the culture, in that, of course, I mean, I have seen my grandmother, because my wife is European. My grandmother would have problems sitting next to her saying she's fairer than me. But that exists. That is pure racism, yes, in a positive way or negative way. But I don't think politicians, at least to my knowledge, I haven't been in India, or I haven't lived there more than 30 years. But I think in one, I would say, very strong point, which I was very proud of when my old friend became the president of US. It was such a glorious, because the US put its hammer down where the rest of Europe still hasn't even achieved, that it chose a black man as the president. This has never happened in Europe, and I'm not sure when it is going to happen in Europe. So, and even if it happens, it will take some time. But US, in my opinion, acknowledges the problem, knows that there is an issue, and is working at it. In Europe, we either don't see the problem, or we blind ourselves instead of acting on it. So in that way, I may be a bit harder or harsher on ourselves, on Europe, to see what we are doing wrong. And there has too many variables and too many factors. We have issues with migration, we have issues with economical disparity, we have issues with violence, we have Europe has too many problems, and Europe is a very old continent. I mean, not compared to Asia, but compared to America. So I think these are the problems. And secondly, I don't agree that this is a problem that should be resolved, because I'll quote Aldous Huxley when he said, how can man, it's something, I may not be correct, 100% correct, something like he said, how can man make man equal when God didn't make man equal? So it sounds very arrogant, it comes over elitist, but it's not. It is that everybody has their positives and everybody has the negatives. I don't think we have to correct or assimilate or make everybody same. That would make the world a completely colorless bland. I want everybody to be equal and everybody treat everybody equally. In Netherlands, that's a very old saying. Okay, now Netherlands has changed a lot, but that you accept everybody at their own value, at their own. I know the Dutch word. I don't know the English translation. So, and I completely agree to it that everybody is a color, and you mix the color and you get a rainbow. Why do you want to make it gray?
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yes.
No, just go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ben. Dr. Sharita. So you are a woman from South Asia, and gender issues and many things happening in South Asia. So how do you want to analyze it? Specifically Mr. Ben points? I think he's sharing his European experience, and how do you want to add your Indian experience with our audience? But I'm sure that different country, even let's say our audience from Sri Lanka, he also added this point, like this. Our friend from Sri Lanka, he add, true, this kind of tools maintained by Asia. So I think he likes Muscat Hassan comments. Anyway, Dr. Sharita.
Okay, yes, I think racism, as now it's it's there, it's everywhere. In different degrees and different levels, it's there in almost all the countries, and none of us can say that we are free of racism. And what I think is that where does racism stem from? And where does this, this desire to dominate the other or make the other, the other? Where does it stem from? I think it stems from our basic fear as individuals. That person has come to take something away from me. Maybe he has come to take my job. He has come to take he has come to weaken my economy. I may have to share something of myself to him or her. So I think that is the basic feeling which gives rise to racism in us. And I think if every one of us can work on that, if we can from the very beginning condition our minds, if as Mr. Ben said, that if we can bring in bring in cohesiveness in our society, that every one of us can exist equally and bring in our myriad hues like rainbow, and bring in the difference and to make a society of different people with different levels of expertise or capacities. And if we can live cohesively in that society, I think if we can do away with the intrinsic fear in us. As humans, we are always riddled with fear. We are always fearful of the other. Okay, that person is going to dominate me. The fair wife. If I don't have a fair wife, then my friend's fairer wife will dominate me. This fear is always the one factor which gives rise to domination and exploitation of different kinds. If we can do away with that fear, I think we can do away with racism. We can do away with the religious bias that we have. We can do away with inequality. Every kind of problem, I believe, stems from fear. And if we can manage fear, then I think then we can have a society where we all coexist peacefully, bringing in our differences and our lacks, everything, even our lacks, because my lack can be fulfilled by someone else, and someone else's lack may be fulfilled by me. So if we can have that openness in our minds, then maybe we can have a great society. Well, it'll take time, but of course, I'm positive.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
It's a very funny example, or not funny. Maybe it's you mentioned fear. fear of others. I completely agree. It is the fear of others. But sometimes fear can be used for positive. Do you know, I was very surprised when the first time I went to Moscow. In Moscow is an extremely metropolitan city. You have people with Chinese background, African background. Every continent of the world is moving. But this racism, as we know in West, doesn't exist there because they're all living under, I'm talking about the Soviet time. They're all living under this extreme strict, how do you call it, rules and regulations, or kind of a state apparatus. So in that case, I would say fear worked positive. It worked against racism.
Yes, definitely. I also agree this point that fear always good for us because it give us some positive energy and some objective. I can remember because me and Maskawata Hassan from debating backgrounds, so he is my mentor for debate from debating arena. Anyway, I can remember that when we started our debating career, like let's say 2005, 2006, that time we observed one movie, the Denzel Washington's movie, The Great Debaters.
The Great Debater.
Yes, The Great Debaters. From there, we learned that, like once upon a time, Harvard not allowed the black students for getting admissions and other things in Harvard University. But the black people, they develop a very good debating team and they win against Harvard University in that movie. And it's a real story. And I can remember we become so inspired through this movie and other things. So I read one of the small private university and we develop a debating teams. And with our very hard works and other thing, not only we become the national champion, even I can remember in 2013, we win against Harvard University in debating. Not only that, Bangladesh become world debate champion in 2013, Brack University. I think Maskawata Hassan, no. So sometimes if we have fears and some sort of obstacle and challenge, it always motivate us that, and I always say that from debating and this kind of challenge, I learn a lot, especially leadership skills, how to achieve objective, how to determine about your goals and other things. Even like trainer like Maskawat Hassan and other people, they actually give us a lot of moral support.
Fear,
So that's
sorry to intervene. Like fear is good till that point, as long as I'm alive. Like, you know, if you create fear within the community of minority and you try to uproot them from their homeland as they're Hindu or they're Muslim, then that kind of racism and fear is not expected in, at least in a civilized world. The everyone has this insecurity inside him and a sense of deprivation or fear of others or fear of change or something new, or everyone wants to have their own comfort zone with only familiar faces. That is very common human psyche. But when again, Mr. Bain, I'm going back to my point that when politicians, they try to utilize this racism, which is inherent within the community, as a tool of their so-called ultranationalism to turn it into a cash cow, or continue their money-making machine in the name of democracy and politics, I have a problem there.
okay.
I completely agree to that. I'm just saying that it's not a matter of racism. They are using something else. How I look
Exactly.
at racism is pure on the basis of race.
Hatred
No,
and-
definitely. That's why
And you
we
can't
believe that.
separate Indians and Pakistanis.
Yes.
They're the same race, unfortunately.
Yes, definitely. Like we need to develop a good policy. We have to develop our policy. I believe that our law, rules, regulations, everything from British period, 100 years old. So that's why we
Don't
need your
accuse
support.
British all the time, because now
Yeah.
British, they have this is another thing. We take everyone on a time machine and we accuse the past.
Yeah.
So we can never resolve our
No,
current
we
situation.
need to add some policy analysts like Mr. Benz, and who can help us to develop different policy for 21st century. But I do not know. I'm very honest with you. From Bangladeshi politicians, I never see. I'm very honest with you. I'm just giving you good feedbacks. I'm also from a political background and the political family, but I never see that politicians, they are advanced thinker and they are taking initiative which is necessary for the youth community. So, and that is our objective, World Talent Economy Forum. We try to reach the youth community. Maybe if we can develop better youth community, they may change future and other things. Anyway, we have our American friends from like Professor Donalds, Mr. Brent, and Mr. Jamit. So how do you want to analyze this point? We are discussing our own South Asian issues. So how do you want to add your experience from, yeah.
So yeah, I could add on to that. So something that was coming into my mind during this all was the idea that that it's more sometimes of this pecking order, that creates these types of things, and then it turns into, the pecking order from the outside looks like a racism type of thing. As Mask Wife is talking about, where it's, it seems like it's like the elites, are utilizing racism for their benefit to maintain, their financial gains and things like that. And there is, to a degree, probably absolutely that's the case. But I think that it's more of this deep-rooted pecking order, and it's not just a human issue. If you look in the animal kingdom, this type of behavior is ever present, and and all these. So it's not really something that's unique to us. But I do think that it's something to be aware of, and I think that there's no way to truly overcome it, as Ben was talking about, quoting Aldous Huxley and such. And I think that something that I think of that's really important for me is the idea of, we talk about affirmative action, or we used to talk about it here in the United States. And the idea of when, like Maskwaith was talking about, where, he experienced that woman who had the good fortune or the kind heart to provide you with some money when she knew that you were in a tough situation. And I think that that this is something that if more people kind of took to heart, realizing we all have an awareness of other people's situations to a degree. I think that trying to pretend that we're all the same and, not seeing color or not seeing race, I think that can become its own type of racism, because you're ignoring the disparity that does exist, and you're just assuming that they were given the same amount of options and the same amount of opportunity as yourself, when that's not necessarily true. And so I think that it's really important to be aware of our own levels of opportunity versus other people's, and to try to overcompensate in a way, to try to balance out these types of things from our own personal, what I can control, because it's a lot more difficult to, convince everyone to realize that they're biased, and to help them see their biases and help them overcome their biases, or to use these fears in, beneficial ways. And that those are good things. Those are things that should be, part of school programs, in my opinion, overcoming biases and how to utilize fear in the most appropriate way, because, fear can be good, but it also can be really bad. It's very crippling, and it can really have a damaging effect if we're not properly transmuting it into something beneficial. And so I think that, those types of things are helpful, and they would be essential. But I think that as an individual, the best thing that I can see fit is to see how I can help, right here, right now, and not assume that this problem is bigger than me, because, although it is, of course, bigger than all of us individually, we all individually can do something to help.
Yes, definitely. This is very important point. Beside that, I want to at some point, because Maskwat Hassan is here, he's a columnist anyway. So fact is that, like, especially the youth utilization is also important from overcome this challenging situation, I believe personally. Even actually youth has a lot of potentiality, and they can change many like good, like they can change, they can be the change maker. So I think that that is World Talent Economy Forum objective. We want to develop our youth community, so we need more support. How Mr. Ben actually is supporting our initiative, the same thing I think Art Place Academy also supporting us, Transhumanist Party also supporting us. So we need better understanding and good collaborations with global community. So Professor Donald, so how do you want to analyze this point? Unmute yourself, please.
I just had to unmute myself there. So anyway, yeah, just love listening to what everybody here has to say. I think it's useful to kind of sort things into a couple of different piles. And one pile is the structure that's imposed, Okay, so we can have a government, and the example of that is what you were talking about in Moscow. There's an imposed structure. It's also that the Russians also never really were racist. I mean, one of their greatest poets, Pushkin, was actually half Ethiopian. He was half black, and he was a darling of the court. And so Russians tell me, they say, well, you know, we just never really were racist, at least in that way. They have other people that they don't like. But and then there's this social structure of the way that Brent was talking kind of about the idea of pecking orders, and it's a little more complicated than that. One of my actually friends is the world's leading expert on hierarchies in chicken and fish. So he's the world's leading expert on pecking orders. And it turns out there's kind of an like unconscious part of us that arranges ourselves into hierarchies, into social structures. It's not a matter of the biggest and the baddest beating up the next one and the next one. Those form unstable hierarchies that aren't anything like what animals do, humans and other animals. So it goes into the reality that who we are is partially determined by our social society. So it's an idea of social identity, and so we become what's possible within our social group, our social structure. And how do we get the stories or the narratives that make us be who that we're going to become? And I'm going to talk about that, but while I'm sorting it into piles, I want to then talk about the third pile, which is the pile of our own individual responses to things. And so ultimately, when we look at our own individual responses and we're trying to make a choice personally, that's going to be a little bit different than what's going to be happening if we're doing it as a society. In Finland, they took Somalian immigrants. And just to put it in perspective, one person in Finland told me that the only time his grandfather had ever seen a black person was in the zoo. Yep. Or in the circus, yeah. And they had him in a cage, and it said underneath it, "See the wild man from Africa," and he'd rattle the bars and scream. And now if you go to Helsinki or even Oulu, there's many people from Africa, from Somalia. And what they did is they didn't let them become in a ghetto. They put them in apartment buildings where they intermixed with everyone else. And so it's kind of amazing to see young black Somalian kids speaking perfect Finnish and, you know, going to work with everybody else. And they managed to do it from a top-down way. But if you look at India, like I have quite a few Indian friends. I worked at a company for a while that the majority of the people were Indian. And I have one Indian friend who absolutely hates Muslims. He will absolutely, under no circumstance, say anything good about Muslims. He just hates them. And he's an engineer at a top medical technology company. And yet and then another Indian friend was telling me, well, I wouldn't date her because she's from the country. And so if you read to this day, the people that are considered untouchables are still not treated as the Dalit are not treated as well as the people, and they can be beat up and killed and nobody cares in many places in India. So I heard a talk by Stanford where they analyzed the Indian companies and looked at their leaders, and they found that just outrageously out of proportion, the leaders of the companies were from the Brahmin caste originally. So the caste system is still there. And I don't think that it's so much that the British imposed the the structure. I think it's more that the British used the structure. So they were using the inherent way that that particular society had been ordered in order to play people against each other. They didn't just do it in India, they did it everywhere. That was one of their tricks for controlling countries. So the Finnish example is a case of kind of top-down imposed control. The Indian case and American cases are cases where this structure, so the caste system existed. It hasn't. People really don't change that fast. I mean, people learn what reality is from their parents and the people around them, and so that passes for many generations. And so in the United States, the structure of slavery is what built one of the things that built our particular social structure. So then the answer gets to be down to at the individual level, which is it's hard to hate close up. And rather than, I think that the best solution is to understand that each of these worlds, different aspects of Black America, different aspects of Latin American, Latin American, Hispanic, Latino America, have this amazing things. They're just amazing culture, amazing food, amazing ways that they relate to each other. Each one of these has incredible beauty. And so the personal thing to do is to realize that every single solitary person on earth has something to teach you. And every single solitary culture can be beautiful and try and accept it. And certainly what Huxley said was that it's silly to assume that we're all the same, and there's no real need to. And the last thing I'm going to say is, but on the other hand, if we have a structural system where people are structurally put down by the actual society, like in America, Black people are arrested at a fantastically higher rate than white people. They're incarcerated at a fantastically higher rate. Those are kinds of things that we need to look at from the larger picture, the idea of the imposed structure, and we have to work on that too. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Mr. Jim Eid.
Thank you, Sharif. Yes, I have been fascinated by this. Sri Alshan has left the meeting, but what he was talking about in terms of the United States, we just went through 4 years of this, with people in power trying to strike fear into the hearts of others and to grow division. And we're just trying to emerge from that environment. So, if you think you're okay today, you might not be okay tomorrow in terms of these erupting in our society, because it is a universal issue. I was fascinated listening to Dr. Sri to talk about the idea of being obsessed with being white. Obviously I can take it for granted, but I'll go on about why that is not always the best thing in my case. But, I was in a living, loving relationship with a woman with ebony skin, dark eyes, and a dazzling smile, and she was beautiful. I don't see how you could possibly think that, that it was not something to aspire to, that kind of beauty. So, but it's very interesting if we go back in time to prehistoric times even, we will find that dark skin has been almost universally shunned in favor of lighter skin. And now why that might be, I don't know, but it might be as simple as that when the sun goes down, it's dark and we become afraid. And when the sun comes, our fear lessens. It might be that, I don't know, but you can go back even into Egyptian times and see that this kind of discrimination, but it's not based on pigmentation of your skin. I mean, gosh, you just look at some people and they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful, regardless of their ethnicity. And so why can't we just see us as ourselves? And this is the issue that we are running into. Yes, politicians will use this as a wedge between us, to play one off the other. Yes, that is absolutely true. And yes, there are some historical reasons. We talk about slavery, and that includes the people that came from Africa, but there is also this forcible import of people from China as well. We had the phrase being Shanghai, and we called them coolies, and we put them into forced labor. Now, someone with my ethnic background is Irish, and if you've seen the movie The Commitments, the line in there is that the Irish are the blacks of Europe, and the Dubliners are the blacks of Ireland, and the East Dubliners are the blacks of Dublin. And so it's all this kind of thing where you can discriminate any way, shape, or form that you care to, and you can be indiscriminate as well. But it's a choice, and it's a conscious choice, and you have to work at it. It isn't easy. You don't just wake up one day and go, I see people they are for what they were. And, I don't have to be afraid. And I also think that there's an element of self-esteem that's involved here, because you're not comfortable in your own skin. You want to change your skin. You think you're not fair enough. You want to be fairer. What has that got to do with being a good human being? I have no concept of why my pigmentation of my skin would make me a better human being. So I think we have to turn this around. Be comfortable with yourself. Be comfortable in your own skin. As I always say, it's an inside job. Work on yourself first, and then your community, and then go beyond. Thanks again, Sharif.
Yes. Even recently, we observed like Black Lives Matters movement, and this is also meaning that many like problem also USA has. On the other hand, USA has many progressive people, those who want to protect Black lives and other things. I want to take one question from audience, and definitely our speakers will analyze this point. What are some of the similarities between racism and class discrimination? Do we have more class discrimination around the world than racist behavior? Our friend named Mr. Gary. So I want to start from Dr. Sharita.
In India, I would like to talk from the Indian perspective. I think this is one question which needs more, elaborate study, and I would like to hear from everyone. There is, of course, a difference between racism and class discrimination, but ultimately, the one who gets discriminated on every ground. We were having, in the discussion, one of the speakers said that Hindus and Muslims, in India, and then the Brahmins dominating the Dalits. Yes, of course, that has been there. But now what has happened is that there have been so many rules and regulations in order to uplift the discriminated community, the Dalits. There are reservations where children, even if you sit in a competitive exam and you get much more mark than your counterpart who happens to be in the reserved list, a Dalit, and you are a Brahmin and you score much more marks than your Dalit counterpart, but you will be denied admission in a good college, but your counterpart will get admission in a good college. So that has also given rise to reverse racism. I think that has put more hatred in the minds of the upcoming generation, because it is the reservation system has been there in India since the past 60, 70 years. So it was done in order to bring the discriminated class or the exploited class along with the mainstream, so that they could also take advantage of the same educational system. But I think 60, 70 years is a long time, and we are still talking reservation. Now, what this is doing is that I see amongst the young children that there's reverse racism. That okay, you are a Dalit, so I mean, fine. Even if you get 40%, you'll always be getting a better college seat than me, even if I get 70%. So that is the kind of feeling that the young people have nowadays, and I think. Why we started off with reservation in the first place was in order to create equality among different sects of the society. But I think we are widening the chasm. by not taking appropriate action. I think we have done enough of reservations, 60, 70 years. Okay, I understand that we still need to uplift the lower section of the society. But now I think it is less racism and more class discrimination. I think the poor, it has to, it should be about the rich and the poor, not the caste system anymore, in India at least. It should not be between competition between a Brahmin and a Dalit. I think the competition should be between a rich person and a poor person. I think we need to uplift the poor person, bring them up to the level of the rich person, and not see which religion or which caste that poor person belongs to. So even poor Brahmins are being discriminated against in this reservation system, and I think we are just uh, widening the chasm that has already been there. We are not doing anything in order to bridge these two people together. So I see a very, very dangerous situation there because we're not doing anything in the governmental level. We are not doing anything in the policy making level. So I think once we start talking about, once we start mitigating these class differences, racism will go away. I think that's what I feel. And I'd like to hear from the others.
Thank you. Mr. Brentelman.
Thank you. There's parts of what you're saying, Dr. Srita, that I agree with, and then some aspects that I don't entirely agree with. I do agree that this class discrimination is a major aspect of all this racist stuff, and I think that if we level out the playing field, it will make major differences. But I think that this type of affirmative action that you're talking about is essential. Like what Professor Donald was talking about, for instance, with Finland and the Somalian population there. Had those people just been left kind of at their own devices, we would have seen ghettos, and we would have seen that kind of disparity and separation. And Ben was talking about the idea of still maintaining our own cultural identities and stuff. So I think that there is a degree to an awareness of that as well, that we're not just going to all just mix and create this one type of person. But I think that the only way that we can really get to that point where we're moving past these racist tendencies and we're realizing that it's more of this class discrimination type thing is to really, help bring up these groups that are, not just people impoverished, but there are groups that are absolutely, on the lower rungs of society, whether it's a racial group or a religious group, because I think that over the last however many years, I think that these types of tribalistic otherings have focused more on religion than and class discrimination, because I think that with religion it's very easy to pick up someone else's book and find passages that you don't agree with and then claim that all of these people believe in X, Y, or Z. And so it makes it much easier when they've written it all out for you, and these books are written hundreds or thousands of years ago, because there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense in modern society. And so I think that there's a level to just accepting the fact. And, I think that there's a point to which, empowering these communities, and giving them representation in society, and not forcing them to, go hide their religious faith or to, push it to the side, but instead to bring it to the surface and to show people what it is. And I think that these different types of affirmative actions do help. And in the United States, I think that there has been a similar backlash of this resentment. But, at this point in the game here in the United States, we see this concept of white privilege and these people who are unwilling to acknowledge the existence of white privilege. And, at the end of the day, there's different types of privileges and, these class, and the difference between having money and not having money is a major aspect here. But I think that, at the end of the day, white privilege is still a thing. And the more people try to skirt from, agreeing with that statement, the more they are going to partake in racist tendencies. And so I really think that it's on us all as individuals to see how we all have certain we all have a leg up in one way or another. And so I think that when it's our turn to kind of not be the top dog, or our turn to just kind of be in a situation where the playing field is a little more level. I think that it's easy for the people who have these inherent privileges to become very sour, because they look at their parents and they look at everyone else that they've grown up around and they think, oh well, they had it, so why can't I? And these resentments will form. But I think that overcoming those resentments are more important than not providing outreach. And because for me, for instance, one of the biggest places in society where this type of stuff needs to occur is amongst transgenders and homosexuals and things like that, because the stuff that these types of people deal with, at least here in the United States, the discrimination and just the outward hatred that certain groups have towards these people is really astounding and disgusting to put it nicely. And I think that there's a degree to which it's on us to recognize that it's not just about treating this person how I want to be treated, but about recognizing the fact that this person is being treated on a daily basis in ways that I would never be able to fathom. The experience that this person's going through is nothing like my experience. And so to just treat them like how I would want to be treated isn't enough. I think that it's on us to actually recognize. And sometimes, sometimes it might feel funny. Sometimes people might be like, well, they didn't need to do that for me. But sometimes you might prevent someone's suicide, And so I think that, those are some of my perspectives on this for sure. And so I think to go back to the question that Gary posed, though, with this class discrimination versus racism, I do think that class discrimination is sometimes the bigger problem, because then this racism turns into an issue where you have these people that are on these lower rungs of society and they're forced to do things to get bread on the table that we, would look down upon. And so then, I don't remember if it was Professor Donald or James who was talking about, I think it was Professor Donald talking about the number of arrests in the United States, of African Americans, people of color, and how many more. And so you'll have these people, these people who refuse to acknowledge white privilege, that want to discuss these things from this context and say, hey, well, look, these people are criminals. They're doing this and they're doing that. But why are they doing this? Why are they stealing? Why are they doing that? Because of this inherent, separation of wealth and the fact that they don't have opportunity. And so to blame them as a race or as this group that's inherently evil is totally out of line, because at the end of the day, it's their, it's this disparity that's resulting in these things. And so this class discrimination furthers these different types of, racist, existences in our society, where there's racism or just tribalism as a whole. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brent-Elman. We have our new speakers, Saima Ahmed. She is an activist from London. I think from debating community to politics, everywhere she has some success and she contributes a lot for human development. So Saima Ahmed, if you introduce yourself with our audience and with our speakers. We have Professor Donalds from California. We have Mr. James from California. We have Brent-Elman from USA. Besides that, we have other panelists. They also contribute for racism and racial injustice. So how you want to introduce yourself, as well as this point we are discussing about racism and racial injustice.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and a very good afternoon where I am here. It's afternoon, good afternoon to you all. I've been hearing some of it, what Ahmed has been saying, and I really, really love the way racism has been portrayed at the start today. So a bit about me. I am a councillor of one of the local boroughs called London Borough of Redbridge. So I represent a political party, but I represent the people above all. And so I'm a local government representative, and through my work, what we normally do is we actually try to address, a big part of our work is trying to address inequality, injustice, and rights of people. Personally, I, as an activist, I believe in fairness and opportunity ensured at all levels, because, living in a diverse community in different parts of the society, especially where we are, London is is very cosmopolitan, very multicultural and diverse city. And when we have people from different ethnic backgrounds coming and living here, we have to make sure that we address and respect the diversity aspect. So, as I'm sure many of the speakers have already mentioned about the different aspects, how racism is expressed or how it has been vested, some of the things that has been recurring, especially during this COVID period, has been how the structural racism, the institutionalized racism, how people have been portrayed, how they have been conceived, and how they have not had the chance to properly participate in at all levels of the decision making stage, and that also exposed the inequalities within, especially in the health side of it. In the public health, we have been working a lot with the local community, and we have seen that one of the best outcomes can be achieved if proper engagement is done. Some of the I would say jargon or words that always surface is hard to reach communities. We would say BAME, which is a widely debated aspect in today's world, because people no longer want to be identified as someone as Black, Asian, ethnic minority. This is actually breaking down. Now, if we look at the more of the theoretical side of it, people are more aware of their individual identity. They don't want to be boxed in as male, female. There is no binary identification. So this is a very interesting point where we are standing. Like, if we are trying to address racism, what we have called racism, maybe in the last decade or so, has completely changed. This is something else in terms of identity, if we look at it. Because nowadays, since the Black Lives Matter movement, people really don't want to be identified as Black, because they feel that with Black, they will say we are African Americans or African British or something like that. Black, those kind of things. I think we really are looking at a transitional time where we are trying to redefine the dialogues and how we are going to call racism now. What I'm trying to say is that the whole concept of it is so fluent nowadays, and it's moving. Things are changing for good. Now, in terms of practices, what we do normally in our day-to-day life, what we are trying to do as policymakers is we are trying to address what policies are actually addressing everybody's needs. Now, in terms of doing that, we are looking at the equality aspect of it. You may be aware the Equality Act in the UK, it plays a massive role in terms of addressing the different needs of people. So we have made it a standing agenda. Like every report we publish, everything we say, we make sure that it's mentioned, the equality impact side of it. So it really is a way to address whether we are addressing equality plus racism. Now, a lot of it is also about public attitude. You may know that since Brexit, we have seen there has been some hike in people's attitude toward communities who have been migrating from the main European countries. And there has been reports that people were, being very aggressive, or I would say hostile in a way sometimes. There has been reports of Islamophobia. There has been reports of anti-Semitism. So those kind of mentalities and attitudes also contribute towards racism and racial attitudes. So we are trying to enlighten people, engage people, educate people through dialogue, more community involvement, making sure people are aware of each other's cultural background, knowing about what really it means. At schools, we are having different days where we are trying to portray how different culture can stay together within the community. we have had a series of hate crimes, like what is called hate crime, what can be done, who have been the victims of hate crime, and try to send that message out in through communication. I'm sorry I've
Mhm.
taken a long time about this, but
No, no, no. It's
in
okay. It's
a
okay.
nutshell,
No.
I'm trying
Yes.
to give a brief of the work that we do at local level with the
Mhm.
community, how we engage in dialogue and discourse.
Thank you, Sam Ahmed. I'm really, really proud of you because from Bangladesh to London, you are conquering the worlds, and with your ability, I do not have any doubt about your ability. You are contributing for the like the global communities, and you are developing policy. We're really proud of you, and I always believe that if people have a real objective and they love to contribute through their own capacity, they can do many things. And this is the example we want to bring in the World Talent Economy Forum, how people change the world. So you are one of the lady who is changing the perception of the global community, change the branding of Bangladesh, and we are really, really proud of you. And World
Thank you.
Talent Economy Forum, we always believe in talent people. So hopefully, but I have another questions to you before I go to Professor Donalds and Jem Eid. Like, I want to I want to share, because I personally know you from Bangladesh, from debating community, because you have a huge contribution in debating. Even your husband is a famous uh, j- journalist. He has very good contribution in debating and other things. So how was your journey? Like personally, you face any challenges, and how you overcome from different kind of challenges, if you advise, because most of the Asia Pacific universities and school, college, and global think tank, they are observing this show, and they may learn from you.
You mean journey in terms of my political journey or like my overall engagement?
Yes, political journey. Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, thank you for the question. So basically, as you've said, in Bangladesh, I have been educated there. I finished my first degree from the University of Dhaka, and then I actually moved to UK. Since early years, I've been really, really working hard with the youth and youth development, youth leadership. I have been an IVLP alumni,
Mhm,
and I have also been the youth spokesperson for MDG, the Millennium Development Goals, to Bangladesh. So from
mhm,
a very early stage, when I was already in Bangladesh, I was very much engaged with the leadership skills, learning to how to make changes at local, national, and international level.
mhm,
Personally, for me, one of the passionate areas has been that to actually translate the language of the world from the global level to the local level. Now, communication is key. For me, I thought that it is really, really important for the young population who are the next generation to be the change makers, to understand what are the different things mean and what impact it had in their lives. So, for example, one of the works I did during Bangladesh was to take part in the Stand Up, Speak Up event. So
mhm,
it was a global call to stand up against poverty. So what we did with this, we were the proud participants of the Guinness Book of World Record, where on a
mhm,
single day, 60,000 plus young people in Bangladesh stood up to show solidarity against poverty. So how
mhm,
we did that was very, very simple. We engaged people with the world leaders, how
mhm,
what poverty meant and how that can be transferred and transferred and what can be done at the local level. Those who were
mhm,
volunteers, they had a real good global view of things. So that
mhm,
really helped. So then from there on, I actually came to the UK and I kept those youth engagement and voluntary stuff going. It was only a matter of time that I joined our local Labour Party, and at the grassroots level, I started from there because I really believe that working at the grassroots, you can really learn. Um, a, a big part of my life have been on that learning curve that you always
mhm,
have to learn in order to do that. And I'm very, very active as a cultural person as well. I'm a theatre director. So what I
mhm,
do is I work with community and empower them in a way that they can take real interest in what really matters to them. So I did that. And what I did was, from my work, I have seen that those who are in the academia really do excellent stuff. I took another degree in public policy from King's College, London, and there, through my research work, I've seen that when we go out to the community, a lot of the research work that we do, we look for case studies or evidence. So and on the other hand, the community groups, they do a lot of work, but often their work becomes unnoticed. So since then, my passion has been to connect the academia with the community groups so that we can have a knowledge building, or like one of your program is done, the talent sharing, in a way that is really, really to create a dialogue. So with this journey, what I have seen, I have worked with the homeless community. What I did with them is I did a homeless choir with the homeless community, and it was really, really interesting to see the people who were always pushed aside, saying that, you're homeless, you don't belong. They really belonged. It created an ownership, a civic pride, and I think having that connection really helped. Then I also did another work with the women whose first language was not English. So what helped was really volunteering and advocating for multilingual approach to policy making, or cultural practices. It really helped them for inclusion. So that was another thing that I really did, and it had tremendous results. We are now doing an oral history of the local population, where they are talking about their journey from post-partition and how they have migrated, how they have built families, and then how they build their, the sense of place in the local area. So it is really interesting. If someone wants to really create a journey, why I'm saying this is because these are live examples of how you can really connect with community and how it can bring results at different levels. So personally, I found this really helpful. And recently, with my work, I've also asked people, there are a lot of fellowships and leadership opportunities available. And I have directed and requested many organizations to connect with the community through local government and create provisions. I know USA, they do a lot of work because I have benefited from many of the fellowships and the leadership opportunities. Same here in the UK. I think it creates really good examples of young generation coming forward and learning different things in a very friendly environment. It's not that daunting. So this has been, in a nutshell, my journey. So that's how I've become what I am. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam Ahmed. Actually, like, this is the way we have to change the human lives, and we need to get some good mentors from the community. Like, you are the great mentors. Youth community from the developing nation, they can learn from you how to grow themselves, how to develop themselves, and how to achieve their objective of their life. So we are working World Talent Economy Forums. We are working with 100 different countries, and I think more than 300 corporations and the university, school, college from around the world. They are joining and they are collaborating, and we are working with World Economy Forum, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, even United Nations, MIT, Stanford, all of the important organizations we try to reach. And definitely we need talent people like you, those who can change human life. And your example is very, very important for developing nations youth community, because youth are the futures and they can change the world. So Professor Donalds and Mr. James, so how do you want to analyze your views when you see? Yes.
One thing is, I could listen to you all day. Your work that you're doing in London is just astounding. I love it.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And she's giving examples of something that I was saying earlier, which I think is critical. One thing about us as people is that we talk about ourselves as say, for an instance, groups, and we look at racism and we say, okay, it's people pitting themselves against each other based on racial groups. But we are always members of many different communities. So some people have, so we're talking about the idea of class discrimination. Well, we might see ourselves as being one class. The example of homelessness is an interesting one because we have a lot of homelessness here where I live, and people walk by homeless people and avert their eyes, and like they won't talk. They're maybe like untouchables in India. I mean, it's a similar situation where there's no connection, so you can't really find out about people. I pride myself in being able to, in being willing or eager to talk to anybody. And I can't tell you how many times homeless people have helped me find directions, find things. They know, they're smart people. I mean, they're not idiots. I mean, so they have their own things that they know that I don't know. And so what she's doing about doing things like something like a chorus where that brings people who would never ever interact with the homeless people in contact with them, and starts making it so that they're part of the narrative. And I want to go back to that, and that's the thing that she also brought up, which is that ultimately, if you don't have any contact with another group, whether you're white or black, rich or poor, homeless or housed, whichever group, the only way that you know who they are and about them is what you hear from your social environment. So the people around you and the information sources that you get, you construct them. They're really in your imagination. I mean, you don't talk to them. You just imagine them. So we all imagine other people. And so doing the kind of thing that she's talking about, where you get people into a situation where you bring them together on something different. Like an example from my own life is I'm an amateur guitar player, and I go to music camps. And I'll be playing in music camp with the director of software at Oracle. And I mean, there is no way I could meet somebody like that under normal circumstances. He's got 5 layers of people that would protect him from me. But yet there I am sitting there, right there with him and talking to him. And so we need to know that we're not just one person. We're not just black, white, rich, poor. We're musicians or parents or all these different kinds of wonderful things that we are. And realize that we can connect with everyone on some level, and the how to do it is daunting. And I just really appreciate what you're doing by actually making that happen. So that's great.
Thank you, Professor Donald. Mr. James Steed.
Yes, these are my concluding remarks, I assume. And we had a lot of discussion about the caste system. And, I don't pretend to know very much about this, but I do know in the Gita, Krishna is very clear that it doesn't matter which caste you're in. And if you are capable of devotion and love, then it doesn't matter. And I always say on my shows, it doesn't matter what language you speak, doesn't matter what country you're in. When Thomas Jefferson wrote the memorable words, "All men are created equal." Well, do you really think he believed that? Of course not. Not everyone is created equal, but it's a catchy phrase. What he really meant was all men and women, all people should be treated equally. And that's the thing that we just failed to do, despite whatever country we're from, whatever country, whatever language we speak. We just don't treat people the way we should. And this is something that I always say: start with yourself first. See where you need to grow into that. And I think that one of the problems we're working into, and I was loving listening to what you were just talking about. And but we have had simple solutions for complex problems. Like, for example, in the issue of race, we thought busing would solve it. Well, that's a simplistic solution. And then when we said, oh, well, busing didn't change it, well, it's useless to try. Well, don't try to solve complex problems with simple solutions. Take a look at what you really need to do and do those things. For example, we had a president whose mother was white and father was black, but he was a black president. And we have a vice president now whose mother was Indian, but she's a black vice president. So it's all in our perception. It's how do we perceive people? And if we try to perceive them at a different level than the color of their pigmentation, we might make a bit of progress. But there are people that are going to build walls between us. There are plenty of walls built between us. And if you think racism is not a problem, if we're in a post-racist society, we're just another brick in the wall. So we've got to try to tear down the walls between us and communicate and connect with one another. And the examples that were just given, guitar camp, that's an example. Connect. And don't stay in your own home and fear other people. Connect to other people, and you will find there's nothing to be afraid of. Or if there is something to be afraid of, you'll identify it really quickly, and you'll make yourself scarce. So it's not that scary a world. Go out and participate in it. Thanks very much, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you for today's contribution. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. Before that, I just want to add that World Talent Economy Forums, from May, we want to start our summit and different kind of research initiative, different kind of training and developments, and people like today's speaker, like Sam Ahmed, like Professor Donald, James Ead, Brent Elmans, many people from around the world, they are joining in World Talent Economy Forums. And hopefully with their mentorships, with their guidelines, our youth community can change their life with real life experience. So this is our objective, and our major things. We are working with the governments, corporation, think tanks, even different universities and corporations, and we are making a very good collaboration in Asia Pacific, especially in Asia, with the help of global communities from around the world. So hopefully with your support, especially the audience, those who always support us, as well as the speakers, those who always come up with the different informations, idea, thought, research, their contributions really helpful for World Talent Economy Forums. And we believe talent is everywhere. There is no difference in between developed nations and developing nations community. Only thing is that you have to explore yourself like Sam Ahmed, and you have to make a good plans, and you have to achieve your objective. This is the things we believe that ultimately the way of success. So I directly want to go for concluding remarks. First, Mr. Brent Elman, then Sam Ahmed, then Professor Donalds, and finally James Ead. Mr. Brent Elman.
Thank you, Sharif, and thank you for everything that you've been doing with the World Talent Economy Forum. Absolutely, some great sentiments there. Saima, it's really inspiring what you were discussing, what you've been working on. Especially appreciated the choir for the homeless. That's really an interesting concept. One of the projects I've been working on lately is similar, where we're working on outreach to at-risk youth, 18 to 25, and we're trying to help specifically artists, people with artistic abilities, because people who aren't at risk and aren't traumatized, that are artists, they have trouble enough, and so throwing all that trauma, and you really got some tough stuff to overcome. And the thing about artwork is that not only does it inspire one's own person to be able to create something and see that someone else is appreciative, but one individual artist has the potential to inspire millions. So to help these types of people come and bring themselves up out of strife, powerful stuff. I appreciate it. And then also, as James was talking about as well, in these individual efforts, and focusing inward before outward, I think that's really important, because I think that there is a lot of these nuances and these differences in perspectives and things like that, like we were talking about with Black Lives Matter and the evolution of this concept of self-identity for those types of communities of color, and then how this is all evolving, and it kind of creates a situation where it's, the people who want to help don't know how to at certain points, because they don't know if it's going to be welcomed, because it's just such a sensationalized topic sometimes, overcoming these types of biases and racism. But I think that if we are going about it in the right way, and we're actually trying to make these changes and overcoming our biases as individuals, and trying to really put focus to the focus that's going in and out of our sensory experience, and actually go inward and observe these types of our own observations, to a really extreme degree. It'll help us kind of see how we are behaving, and how we can kind of fix these types of things to be able to treat people as with the utmost respect, and to be able to meet them where they would like us to meet them. And so, I think there's a lot that was discussed today that was really impactful. Thank you again, Sharif, and it was great to connect with everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brent. Sam Ahmed.
Thank you for inviting me in today's platform. Sorry to join late, but whatever I've heard, it's really, really inspiring and encouraging. And especially when we are exchanging thoughts across the globe, I think it makes matter a lot easier to learn from each other's best practices. For me, I think the concluding remarks will be racism is something that is deeply rooted within our societies, within our world political order or political system, whatever you may term them. But I think sometimes we often forget that in terms of eradicating racism or eliminating them from our society or from individual system, it is always a gesture of tokenism. I think we really, really have to be mindful about whatever policies we make, whatever practices we do, and whatever initiatives it's taken. We really have to make sure it is not a gesture of tokenism, just to say that, okay, you are there, we need a quota to be filled in, and let's just do it. These sort of symbolic acts actually does not give the meaning of real inclusion. In today's world, if we want to become a one world, it is very, very important that we identify race as and replace it with human. I think humanism is one way forward, and that would mean inclusion, that would mean positive change, and that would mean we are equal. I think it's a long way to go, and our institutions specifically needs to address how they have created pockets of racial discrimination or fragmentation of opportunities, and this really has to change.
Thank you, Sam Ahmed. Professor Donald.
I think you're muted, sir.
Yes.
I want to reiterate what I said right at the beginning, which is the idea that there's our personal social identity that is something that is kind of given to us by our social environment, and it's something that we can personally address. So I'll get right back to that. And then I also want to mention the part that I talked about the idea of government or top-down changes, and point out that when I talked about Finland and how the Somalians were incorporated into their culture so that they became kind of one with them, there's a downside to that too, because Somalia has a rich heritage, a rich culture. There's a lot that we could learn from them too. So one of the challenges gets to be, how can we preserve the beauty of each of these different cultures and at the same time not be competing with each other? And one of the things that's come up a lot is the idea that each person is individually different. So the question isn't a matter of people being the same, which would be awful, but it's a matter of equal opportunity. And I really agree with the idea that academics have a lot to offer, because the book that I mentioned right in the beginning, The Long Shadow, where they actually spent 20 years following a group of people and saw what it was, what the differences were that made it so that the African American kids did not do as well as the white kids. I mean, we know some of these things, and so we're not going to be able to come up with something like just write it all down and do it. We have to iterate. And so the people that are working in the communities are the people that are going to get us the data and information that we need to be able to see if things that we're doing are actually working. I'm very also optimistic because young people in America are the ones that are driving the Black Lives Matter. And you can talk to a lot of older people and they'll say, oh, that's BS. The only reason that blacks don't do as well as whites is because they're lazy and they're criminals and all this kind of stuff, which is ridiculous. I mean, there's a great book called High Price by a Colombian neuroscientist where he talks about the drug trade and drug addiction. And he points out that if you have no economic opportunity and you become a drug dealer, that's the most economically rational thing you can do. I mean, they're not lazy; they just don't have any other jobs. So it makes a lot of. So how is it that why is this happening? And it's not going to be a matter of affirmative action necessarily. It's something that we have the tools to start to begin to understand, and I think we're starting to do it. So I think that's great. And again, the last thing is that for each of you as individuals, remember that every person is a door into another world. And the more you learn about different cultures, the more innovative you're going to be, the more creative you're going to be, the healthier you're going to be. There's science that shows that. So that's my concluding.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Donald, for your continuous support. Beside that, Sam Ahmed, we want to invite you, even Professor Donald, James Eid, they're working as an advisor for World Talent Economy Forums. People from different communities, even secretary generals and many interesting people, they join as an advisory board. So we want to invite you in our board of advisors, and your guideline can help us. And like people like Brent Elman, me, and many people, we can work together and we can solve many social ecological problems, and definitely your guideline will be helpful for us. Yes, thank you. Mr. James Eid, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Wonderful discussion, wonderful panel. I want to say that, we, from a United States perspective, yes, we went to Africa and took brothers and sisters in chains back to our country and forced them into labor. Yes, we went to China and shanghaied our brothers and sisters from China and put them into forced labor. There's another thing that we don't talk about so much, which was the age of indentured servitude. And I'll talk about this in terms of, yes, they had contracts, but these were contracts with people who were illiterate for the most part. And they were enforced by people in power, and they had them do their work that they told them to do. They had no ability they didn't know anyone. They couldn't get away from it. They were very much treated improperly. And these people might be Irish, for example. Irish people came here when they were starving. And do you think they were put to work and welcomed? No. The only jobs they could do were longshoremen, or maybe walk the beat as a cop. And and there was signs in the stores that said no Irish need apply. We were very easily identified by our brogue. And so there was no escaping being identified, no escaping being discriminated against. But then another wave of immigrants came over, and they were Italians, and they were darker skinned. And somehow the Irish then got assimilated. The Irish were okay because it was the Italians were the problem. But it just keeps getting darker and darker, and I don't mean that as a pun only. It is the racism that has existed in this country has taken many shapes, many forms, and has evolved over time, and it's still present. So, when Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, he had this vision of a place in this country, in the United States of America, where people could be treated equally. And we're still working on it, and don't believe that it's not a problem today. And, I don't know when hippie became a 4-letter word, but, I loved a lot of things about the hippie culture. And one of the things it said was, Come on, people now, smile on your brother. Everybody get together, gotta love one another right now. And those words I tried to live by, and it's not simple. It's not easy. It's a complicated problem. But the other thing I will say in conclusion is do not let others define you. Have your boundaries. Work on yourself, your self-respect, your self-esteem. And so if someone says you're this or that, they call you a name, it hits the boundaries. It doesn't hit your heart. And if someone's praising you, don't let it go to your head. And if they're criticizing you, don't let it go to your heart. Work on yourself first, then your community, and tear down the walls. And don't be another person. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining this World Talent Economy Forum discussions. Hopefully future you will join and you will help us to grow our ecosystems. Thank you for today's session. Thank you everyone. Professor Donald, James Eid, Sam Ahmed, Brent Elman, I want to give you special thanks. Especially I want to give thanks to our audience, those who always support World Talent Economy Forums, and really always they give positive feedback. That's why every day we are developing something new. So thank you everyone. Thank you for your support and everything.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.